My name is Marissa Hale, 31 years old, and last Friday at exactly 7:42 p.m. My phone buzzed with a message that felt like it split the floor beneath me. Don't come to my engagement. You're the family scapegoat. That was it. No explanation, no hesitation, just a blunt dismissal like I was an inconvenience they'd finally decided to erase. Within seconds, heart reactions from my parents appeared underneath the message like they were cheering him on, like they had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb, then typed the only two words that still felt safe. Got it. After that, I set the phone aside and kept working on a custom wedding cake for a client, forcing my breathing to stay steady even though everything in my chest felt tight and bruised. Being labeled the scapegoat wasn't new. I'd spent years playing the part they assigned me, useful when they needed me, invisible, when they didn't, responsible for everything yet, appreciated for nothing. But something about that message, something about the celebration that followed, flipped a switch I didn't know I still had. And what I didn't realize was that the next morning, when they stormed into my studio demanding answers, someone else would expose the truth I had kept buried for far too long, especially the part about how they had used my money. If you've ever been pushed aside or treated like you were the problem in your own family, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything, and it might feel uncomfortably familiar. But I had no idea the real blow was only hours away. Growing up in the Hale household was never easy. Every morning felt like stepping into a stage where the script was already written, and my role was permanently set as the background character who existed only to make everyone else look better. My mom, Diane Hale, ruled the house with a sharp tongue and a sharper sense of favoritism, and my dad, Richard Hale, stayed silent behind his newspaper, as if pretending not to notice would make the dysfunction disappear. My brother, Caleb Hale, sat comfortably at the center of their universe, glowing under a spotlight that my parents never allowed to dim. Diane loved to say Caleb was meant for greatness, even when greatness meant bringing home a test score, barely scraping 80 while mine hit 95. She'd beam at him like he'd solved world hunger. When I handed her my report card, she wouldn't even lift her eyes. A 95 score means nothing, Marissa. Caleb tried his best. That's what matters. It was always like that. My achievements were expected. His failures were celebrated. And somewhere along the years, I learned that nothing I did would ever be enough. The imbalance wasn't just emotional. It was physical exhaustion woven into memory. At 17, I was shivering with a high fever so intense I could barely stand, but Diane yanked the blankets off my shoulders and snapped, "Caleb's birthday is today. Get downstairs and help set up." I remember gripping the railing to keep from collapsing while hanging decorations for a boy who didn't even thank me. On the nights when Caleb threw tantrums because the world didn't give him what he wanted, Diane would lecture me for hours about being the responsible one who had to clean up the mess, literally and figuratively. When I graduated college with honors, I waited outside the auditorium, cap in hand, scanning every face that walked out. My parents never showed. They had chosen to attend one of Caleb's basketball scrimmages instead. It wasn't even a real game. I didn't cry. I just swallowed the disappointment whole, like I'd been doing since childhood, letting it settle beside all the other bruises that never showed on the skin. The Hale house was cold in ways no thermostat could fix. Diane spoke to me as if I were hired help, and Richard never countered her sharpness. Caleb strutted around like a minor celebrity whose existence required my obedience. I cleaned the kitchen because you're more organized, drove Caleb to practice because he needs to rest for the game, and absorbed every slammed door, every raised voice, every dismissive shrug that told me my place. The words Diane hurled left deeper marks than anything physical ever could. Don't be dramatic, Marissa. You're not special. Stop trying to compete with your brother. Be useful for once. Each sentence settled heavy in my chest, forming a quiet ache that grew with every year. I kept my voice steady whenever I spoke, training myself to never react, never shake, Never let them see what their words carved into me. Leaving home at 18 felt like escaping a cage, but the wounds came with me tucked into the corners of my mind. And I thought leaving home would save me. I didn't know the real storm was waiting in adulthood. When I finally turned 18, I ran. I didn't pack much, just a worn backpack with 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, and enough cash for a bus ticket out of the state. Freedom didn't feel glamorous. It felt like standing barefoot on cold pavement with no map and no one waiting for me on the other side. Portland wasn't chosen out of excitement, but because it was the cheapest ticket on the board. The moment I stepped off that bus, the reality hit fast. Rent, food, classes, everything cost more than I imagined, so I took any job I could find. I washed dishes until midnight at a diner that smelled like burnt oil, worked early mornings serving coffee to rushed commuters, and picked up a late-night shift at a small bakery that needed someone to prep dough until sunrise. My hands cracked from the cold, stainless steel sinks, my feet ached constantly, and sleep became a luxury I only tasted in fragments. But the bakery shift changed something in me. While rolling out dough at 3 in the morning, I watched the pastry chef pipe roses onto cakes with a precision that felt like magic. I realized I wanted to create beauty with my hands, not just scrub pans covered in grease. College became another mountain, but I climbed it one class at a time, paying tuition with tips and overtime. I enrolled in a certificate program for wedding cake design, dragging myself to lessons after double shifts. A year later, fate stepped in. The owner of the bakery introduced me to my first mentor, Evelyn Carter, a retired cake artist who came in every Thursday for cinnamon rolls. She watched me practice piping on parchment paper during breaks, and one day simply said, "You have steady hands. Come to my workshop this weekend." That single sentence cracked open a door I never dared to knock on. Evelyn taught me techniques I'd only seen in magazines: sugar flowers, airbrushed lace, structural tier balancing. She pushed me hard but believed in me harder. Months later, she recommended me for an assistant position under Jonathan Reeves, a legendary wedding cake designer known across the West Coast. Jonathan ran his studio like a battlefield, loud, chaotic, filled with deadlines, but he saw potential in me. He let me design side pieces, then full tiers, then entire cakes. For the first time in my life, someone praised my work without comparing me to anyone else. After 3 years with Jonathan, I saved enough to rent a small storefront. I named it Hale Cake Atelier, reclaiming a last name that once felt like a chain. The first months were brutal, long hours, small orders, no guarantee. Then a bride posted my sugar peony cake online. That post changed everything. Suddenly, inquiries flooded my inbox. Contracts worth $20,000, $30,000, written out fully on paper, so they almost didn't feel real, started coming in. Celebrity planners called. Luxury venues asked for partnership. My calendar booked out months in advance. I built a life with my own hands, each design proof that I didn't need anyone's approval to matter. I finally had stability. Money, control, success. Enough resources to help anyone who asked. Enough to change someone's life. I didn't know that was exactly what would lead to mine unraveling. And just when my life finally felt stable, my family came knocking again. It started with a single phone call from Mom. I was finishing a consultation with a bride when my phone buzzed nonstop, vibrating against the metal table like it was trying to leap out of the room. I stepped outside to answer it, expecting something dramatic but not life-altering. Diane's voice cracked before she even said my name. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't ordering. I barely recognized the shaky whisper coming through the speaker. "Marissa, the shop is gone." At first I didn't understand. Then she explained in short, panicked breaths that Dad's woodworking store, the one he'd poured 20 years into, had collapsed under debt. Orders dried up, suppliers pulled out, and the landlord issued a final notice. The doors were officially closed. My brain froze for a moment. That store had always been Dad's pride, the one place where he seemed alive. Hearing it was gone felt surreal. Then Diane's voice shifted into a whimper. "We don't have savings. Your father can't fix this. Caleb is busy preparing for his future. You're the only one we can count on." The words hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything, hearing her sound scared, tugged at something old and fragile inside me. I didn't agree immediately. Part of me whispered that I owed them nothing. Another part reminded me that this was my family, broken or not. So I drove back to my apartment, sat at my dining table, and opened the spreadsheets I never showed anyone. I had savings more than enough to protect myself for years, and the shop's debt was larger than I imagined, but I could cover a big portion of it. After a sleepless night, I called Diane back. "I'll help. But it has to be structured. We need a legal plan." She burst into gratitude so fast it almost sounded rehearsed. Within days, I wired a sum that still makes my stomach tighten, $40,000 paid directly to clear the most urgent debts. Then I reviewed the lease situation. The landlord refused to renew under Dad's name, but he was willing to issue a fresh contract if someone with high credit took responsibility. I didn't want to do it. I knew how binding those documents were. Yet I still went to the office, signed the papers, and put my name on the new lease to save the shop. When I handed the keys back to Dad, he stared at them like he didn't understand why they were in his hands. Diane rushed toward me with a brightness she hadn't shown me in years. "You're the backbone of this family, sweetheart." She touched my arms like she'd always been affectionate. Richard nodded silently, giving me a look that almost resembled pride. That sudden warmth felt strange, almost artificial, but I told myself it was a beginning. I told myself things could finally change. For a brief moment, the house felt normal. Diane made comments about how strong and dependable I was. Richard muttered that he didn't know what they would have done without me. Even Caleb sent me a thumbs-up emoji, which was probably the closest thing to gratitude he'd given in a decade. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to think my helping hand had finally earned me a place in the family I'd been pushed out of for so long. But beneath their soft voices, something else lingered, a quiet expectation, a hunger I couldn't yet name. And that fake sweetness didn't last long, not when they saw another way to use me. The betrayal didn't come softly, it crashed into me. I had just finished stacking sugar flowers for a high-end order when my phone lit up with a message from Caleb. No greeting, no explanation. Just one sentence that sliced straight through me. "Don't come to my engagement party. You'll embarrass me in front of her family." For a long moment, I simply stared at the screen, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something less cruel. They didn't. A wave of heat crawled up my neck as I read it again. After everything I'd done, the lease I signed, the debts, I covered the support I gave without question. This was how he spoke to me. Before I could even process it, another notification popped up. A group chat message from Diane, 4 heart reactions under Caleb's text. Richard added a laughing emoji as if the humiliation of their daughter was the punchline of some private joke. My chest tightened and the room felt too small. I stepped outside the studio, gripping the railing to steady my breathing. I wanted to scream, to call them, to demand an explanation, but all that came out was silence. My fingers moved on their own, typing 2 words that held everything I didn't say. Got it. I wish the hurt stopped there, but it only dug deeper. Hours later, Diane called, not to apologize, but to scold. Her voice was sharp, irritated. "You brought this on yourself, Marissa. You make everything dramatic. Caleb just wants a peaceful night. A peaceful night without me. A peaceful night paid for by my sacrifices." I swallowed the burn rising in my throat, but the hurt pulsed through every word I didn't speak. Richard chimed in from the background, mumbling about how I always ruin big moments. They talked as if I hadn't saved their business. As if I wasn't the reason they still had a roof over their heads. As if I didn't matter at all. When the call ended, I sat in my living room staring at the quiet glow of the lamp. I felt something inside me shift, not just pain, but clarity sharp enough to cut. Every hope I'd built about our family healing, every fantasy of being valued cracked apart like a sugar sculpture dropped from too high. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake replaying every moment of the past months, their sudden affection, their soft words, their gratitude that now tasted like poison. It was all an act. I wasn't their daughter. I was a credit line with a heartbeat. The deeper the night grew, the clearer the truth became. The betrayal wasn't in the message alone. It was in years of being dismissed, used, and tolerated only when beneficial. My throat tightened as the last illusion finally died. It wasn't anger that kept me awake. It was the realization that I had handed them access to my life, my success, my hard-earned stability, and they repaid me with humiliation. By the time the sun edged over the horizon, I felt hollow, but awake in a way I hadn't been before. Something was coming. I didn't know what. I only knew the air felt different, heavy, in a way that warned me I wasn't done being hurt yet. But the real hit came the next morning when they barged into my studio. At 9 sharp, the doorbell at my studio wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't the polite tap of a customer. It was relentless, frantic pounding that echoed through the metal frame. I was midway through piping lacework onto a 5-tier wedding cake for a VIP client, hands steady, despite the noise, when the front door burst open. Diane stormed in, first, her expression twisted with desperation. Richard followed jaw tight, and Caleb pushed in behind them, wearing an entitled scowl. And trailing last was Elena Whitford, Caleb's fiancée, wide-eyed as she took in the polished marble floors and the custom neon sign glowing above my workstation. My client froze beside me, stunned. Diane didn't wait for permission to speak. "We need $35,000 for Caleb's engagement," she snapped as if announcing the weather. "The venue wants the payment today." My client blinked in disbelief. I set down my piping bag, wiped my hands slowly, and looked directly at her. "You're asking me to pay for your event?" Diane huffed like I was being unreasonable. "You've always covered the important things. This is nothing compared to what you make." Caleb added, "Don't be dramatic, Marissa. You know you're supposed to help the family." Something inside me clicked into place. I felt the calm settle into my bones, not quiet, but sharp. I stepped forward, voice steady and cold. "If I'm the scapegoat, then stop using my money." The room went silent. Diane blinked rapidly, confused. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Caleb's eyebrows shot up like he hadn't expected me to speak at all. I didn't give them time to recover. I walked to my office, grabbed the thick financial folder I'd kept locked for months, and came back out with it tucked under my arm. "You want money?" I said. "Let's go through what I've already paid for." Their faces shifted from arrogance to tension. I opened the folder, flipping page by page. The debt clearance for the woodworking shop, $40,000. Paid by me. Diane's lips trembled. The new lease contract for the store signed under my name. Without me, the place would be empty right now. Richard's shoulders slumped. The supplier down payments, utility bills, and overdue invoices, every single one issued from my accounts. Caleb scoffed. "You're exaggerating." I cut him off and handed the folder to Elena. She hesitated, then took it. "Read it," I said. Elena flipped to the first page. Her eyes widened at the signatures. She turned another page. My bank statements, the receipts, the lease contract, the transfers, every dollar documented. The color drained from her face. "All of this?" "This is from Marissa," she whispered. Diane tried to intervene. "Sweetheart, don't listen to." But Elena didn't stop. She kept reading, voice tightening as the truth stitched itself together in front of her. Caleb lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder from her hands. "Elena, stop. She's twisting it." "No," she said quietly, stepping back. "These are her accounts. This is her name. All of it." Richard pinched the bridge of his nose, defeated. Diane looked like she might faint. Caleb's voice broke into a frustrated growl. "This is why you're impossible, Marissa. You always make yourself the victim. I stared at him unblinking. I'm done funding your life. My client watched in stunned silence. Even the mixers had stopped humming. And that was the moment Elena turned toward me and everything changed. Elena didn't stay silent. She walked into the rehearsal dinner with her shoulders squared, holding the financial folder like it was evidence in a trial. Guests smiled at her, unaware of the storm brewing behind her calm expression. She stepped onto the small stage, tapped the microphone, and said one sentence that sliced the room in half. "The engagement is off." Gasps shot through the air. Caleb stumbled toward her face, draining of color, but she held up the folder before he could speak. "I refuse to marry a man who lies, manipulates, and lives off someone else's work," she declared, voice steady. "And I refuse to join a family that exploits the one person who actually keeps them afloat." Someone dropped a glass. Diane swayed, gripping a tablecloth. Caleb tried to grab Elena's arm, but she stepped away and handed the folder to his boss, who had been seated at the next table. Within minutes, whispers spread like wildfire. By morning, the consequences hit with surgical precision. Caleb's company terminated his contract for ethical concerns and reputational risk, a devastating blow in the PR world where image is everything. Richard's membership in the local business association was suspended pending review, effectively cutting him off from the network he relied on for clients. Diane, who proudly ran the women's leadership circle at her country club, found herself removed from group chats, uninvited from events, and quietly replaced by someone the board deemed a more suitable representative. The Hale household collapsed in on itself. Accusations ricocheted from room to room. Diane blamed Richard for not controlling the chaos. Richard blamed Caleb for ruining everything, and Caleb blamed everyone but himself. Their unity dissolved into pure survival mode. And when people panic, they look for the resource they've always depended on: me. The calls began the same afternoon. First, Diane, voice shaking Marissa. "We need your help to fix this. You're the only one people still respect." Then Richard, stiff and rehearsed. "If you contribute a little, we can recover." Then Caleb, angry, bitter. "This is partly your fault. You could fix it in a day if you wanted." I blocked his number before he finished his sentence. The messages poured in next. Long paragraphs, short demands, voice notes filled with guilt-tripping. "Family sticks together. We're suffering. Caleb is devastated. You can't abandon us." I read each one, heart steady, breath even. Then I typed the only truth that finally felt clean: I don't owe this family anything anymore. I sent it, turned my phone off, and let the quiet settle into the room like a balm. No guilt, no hesitation, no lingering ache begging for approval. Just stillness. And when the calls stopped, when the notifications fell silent one by one, I realized how heavy the noise had been my entire life. Cutting them off didn't feel cruel, it felt necessary. And for the first time, the silence felt like peace. But my story wasn't done yet. A year later, everything looked different. I woke up in my Seattle apartment to quiet sunlight filtering through the curtains, the kind of peace that didn't feel borrowed or fragile. After leaving Portland behind, I opened a new studio, Marissa Hale Atelier, not out of necessity, not out of pressure, but because I finally wanted to create something that belonged only to me. Business grew slowly at first, then steadily, and eventually, my designs found a loyal circle of clients who appreciated the precision and heart I poured into each piece. There were no emergency calls demanding money, no crises dropped into my lap, no guilt woven into every conversation. Just work, passion, and space to breathe. One afternoon, while reviewing sketches for a collaboration cake with a luxury hotel, my phone buzzed with a message from Elena. We hadn't spoken since the night everything fell apart, and for a second I hesitated. Then I opened it. "Thank you for standing up when no one else could," she wrote. "You saved me from a future built on lies. I hope life is treating you kindly." It wasn't a request for reconciliation, not an attempt to reopen a wound, just a quiet expression of gratitude. I replied with a simple, honest message wishing her well, and that was enough. No bridge rebuilt, no relationship renewed. Some endings are meant to stay endings. My family remained distant, and I kept it that way. The silence wasn't harsh or cold anymore. It was healthy, like finally closing a door that had been slamming in the wind for years. Being alone didn't feel lonely when I was finally choosing myself. The biggest shift, though, wasn't in my studio, my city, or my routine. It was internal. For the first time in my life, I could look at my reflection without hearing echoes of criticism or comparison. I no longer felt responsible for fixing everyone else's disasters. I no longer twisted myself into someone more convenient, more useful, more silent. I chose my boundaries and I protected them. And the lesson became clearer with every passing month. Family isn't defined by shared blood. Family is the people who respect your boundaries, honor your effort, and never treat your love like a resource to drain. And another truth settled in right beside it, one I wish I had learned sooner. You cannot sacrifice your entire life hoping someone will finally see your worth. Love given to people who don't value it becomes a slow form of self-erasure. You deserve better than that. We all do. As I close this chapter, I want to thank you for listening to my story. If any part of my experience echoes something you've lived through, I hope it gives you permission to choose yourself without guilt. Your peace matters. Your boundaries matter. And your worth isn't determined by anyone's inability to see it. If you feel comfortable, share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it.